Night had fallen 2 hours ago in these mountains, but Lee Cobbett remembered the trail up from Markham's Fork over Dogged Mountain and beyond. 2, he had the full moon and a blazing sky full of stars to help him. Finally, he reached the place where Long Soak Hollow had been, where now lay a broad stretch of water among the heights, water struck to quivering radiance by the moonlight. Shaggy trees made the last of the trail dark and uneasy under boot soles. He half groped his way to the grassy brink and looked across to something he recognized. On an island that once had been the top of a broad rise in the hollow stood a square cabin in a tuft of trees. Light from the open door beat upon a raft-like dock and a boat tied up there. Dropping his pack and bedroll, Cobbett cupped his big hands into a trumpet at his mouth. "Hello," he shouted. "Hello, the house. Hello, Mr. Luns Lamar. I'm here. Come over and get me." The shadow slid into the doorway. A man tramped down to where that dock was visible. He held a lantern high. "Who's that a-bellowing?" came back a call across the water. "Lee Cobbett, come get me." "No, sir," echoed to his ears. "Can't do it tonight." "But not tonight." The words were sharp, and they meant that thing. "No way. You wait there for me till sunup." The figure plodded back to the doorway and sat down on the threshold with the lantern beside it. Cobbett cursed to himself there on the night shore. He was a blocky man in denim jacket and slacks, with a square seamed face and a mane of dark hair. Scowling, he estimated the distance across. 50 yards? Not much more than that. If Luns Lamar wouldn't come, Lee Cobbett would go. He put the pack and roll together next to a laurel bush and sat on them to drag off his boots and socks. He stripped away slacks, jacket, blue shirt, underwear, and stood up naked. Walking to the edge of the lake, he tested it with his toe. Chill, like most mountain water. He set his whole foot in, found bottom, and waded forward to his knees. 2 more steps, and he was waist deep. He shivered as he moved out along the clay bottom until he could wade no longer. He struck out for the light of the cabin door. The coldness of the water bit him, and he swam more strongly to fight against it. Music seemed to be playing somewhere, a song he had never heard, like a muted woodwind. A hum in his head. No, it came from somewhere away from the cabin and the island, somewhere on the moon-bright water. It grew stronger, more audible. On he swam with powerful strokes. His body glided swiftly, but a current sprang up around him, more of a current than he had thought possible. And the melody heightened in his ears, still nothing he could remember, but tuneful, haunting. Then a sudden shuddering impact, a blow like a club against his side and shoulder. He almost whirled under. He kicked at whatever it was, shouting aloud as he did so. Next moment, he was at the poles that supported the dock, grabbing at them with both hands. Luns Lamar stooped above him and caught his thick wrists. "You damned fool," grumbled Lamar, heaving away. Cobbett scrambled up on the split slabs, kneeling. "Whatever in hell made you swim over here?" Lamar scolded him. "What else was there for me to do?" Cobbett found breath to say. "You said you wouldn't come and fetch me, even when you'd written that letter wanting me to bring you those books. I don't know why I should have moped over there till tomorrow, not when I can swim." "I wouldn't go out on this lake tonight, even in the boat." Lamar helped Cobbett to his feet. "Hey, you're scraped, bleeding." It was true. Cobbett's sinewy shoulder looked red and raw. "There's a log or snag right out from the dock," he said, heading for the cabin's open door. "No," said Lamar. "That wasn't any log or snag." What that was the Dakwa. And that's the first page or page and a half of the story by Manly Wade Wellman of that title, the Dakwa, written or published in Whispers 1, a horror collection published, edited by Stuart David Schiff in the 70s. The story was written in 1977, and this is the first of 5 Lee Cobbett stories. Now, this is the John Funston collection, right? The Third Cry to Legba and Other Invocations. The Selected Stories of Manly Wade Wellman, Volume 1. This is the Nightshade Books edition from all the way back in the year 2000. I have the first 4 out of 5. I don't have the one with the Silver John stories, Owl's Hoot in the Daytime, because I had those stories in other versions, but I still wish I would have bought them. Anyway, the John Funston stories are great. I recommend them on their own, but I wanted to read the Dakwa. It's one of my favorite Manly Wade Wellman stories, who happens to be one of my favorite authors of weird fiction. And the Dakwa is an excellent story. I'd rank it up there with the best of the Silver John the Balladeer short stories, which, if anyone is familiar with those and with Wellman at all, know that's high praise indeed. Okay, Lee Cobbett is a little bit like Silver John in that he's just kind of an everyman. He doesn't have a silver guitar. He doesn't really have any kind of magical powers or anything like that, which John may or may not have. In some cases, certain charms against evil. Partly it's his pure spirit. Cobbett is perhaps a slightly more, ever so slightly more cynical figure, but he's just a regular guy, strong, normal dude. He's into, he studies and tries to fight against various supernatural evils. And in these 5 stories, he encounters some quite interesting beasties and witches and vampires and all sorts of things. But the Dakwa is really original. The Dakwa is actually, it won't respawn. It's a creature living in the water here by Lunds Lamar's cabin, and it's bedeviling him and possibly has killed and eaten, consumed some other people in the area. Once a hotel nearby has flooded the area. That's why now Lunds Lamar's cabin is on an island when it used to be on a peak over a valley. The Dakwa is not something that will react to Christian beliefs or Christian ways to fight evil, traditional ways to be used against for exorcising demons or fighting vampires or the like. The Dakwa is part of an ancient Cherokee Native American spirit that haunts the water. It was apparently it's not a spirit, it's an actual monster of sorts, but it's very original, very interesting. And before long, Lee Cobbett will be taking it on mano y mano, or mano y monster. Anyway, it's a very cool story. Lunds Lamar, as is in that excerpt I read you, Cobbett says, "Hey, I brought you these books." He's an old friend with Lunds Lamar. They've known each other a long time. Cobbett is surprised to see that Lamar is acting so spooked, and he brought him some special books that are about Native American legends, and Cobbett figures out some kinds of possible charms or ways to protect himself as he does battle underwater with the Dakwa. Just a terrific story. It's, I first came across it not in this volume, but in that Whispers 1 anthology, which was edited by Stuart David Schiff. Stuart David Schiff, sadly, like Carl Edward Wagner, did not have a really long life. He was an editor of this fanzine Whispers, and he was one of the people besides Carl Edward Wagner's and David Drake's Carcosa Press, responsible for bringing Manly Wade Wellman kind of back into fantasy and science fiction circles, getting him to start publishing new stories, novels about Silver John. These Lee Cobbett stories were written and conceived later in his career, a few years before Wellman passed away. Now, Whispers itself, I have a couple of issues of Whispers that I got directly from Stuart David Schiff, as well as an early copy of Who Fears the Devil, signed by Schiff, that I bought from him years ago when I was first discovering Wellman. And that's a collection of the earlier Silver John stories from the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction, where those were published. But those collections, Whispers collections that were done in hardback and put out, I think there was at least 3 of them. There might have been more. Whispers 1, 2, and 3. I know I have 2 and 3. I'm not sure if I have 1, but I definitely got it from the library years and years ago, shortly after it was published. And it had the Dakwa in it. I believe it had Styx by Carl or Wagner. It had a lot of great stories from either up-and-comers like Wagner or old school guys like Hugh B. Cave and Wellman. Anyway, the Dakwa is a fantastic story. I really recommend it. As you can tell from what I read you, it's Wellman's prose is, fairly sparse but vivid, and has a very nice mountain flavor. He really focused and specialized in Appalachian locales and legends and myths. Some of them he created himself. Some of them he took from real legends and myths because he spent a lot of time up there and got friendly with the local people. And the Cobbett stories are all good. I recommend them. I read one more, which is the last one in this volume, and that is Chastel. Now, Chastel was first published in the Year's Best Horror Stories, Volume 7, which is a DAW book, and I have that DAW book somewhere back home in the U.S. I don't have it here with me, but I do have the story Chastel here in this book. And that was a volume, an anthology edited by Gerald W. Page. Now, Chastel is a vampire story, and it's a very good one. And it stars Lee Cobbett and his girlfriend Laurel, who he meets in a later story after Dakwa, The Beasts That Perish, the second Lee Cobbett story. There were 5 Lee Cobbett stories. Chastel doesn't only feature Lee Cobbett, though. It features one of Wellman's earlier monster fighter, occult detective characters, maybe the earliest one, Judge Keith Hillary Pursuivant, who is now, when you read about how Pursuivant is described here, in the earlier stories from Weird Tales or whatever, he was much younger, I think. But here he's an older man in his 80s, but still spry, big, strong, raw-boned, much like Manly Wade Wellman himself was at that age. Nice portrait of Manly, who was quite a dignified-looking gentleman in his old age. And he wrote the story in 1979, or published it in 1979, just a few years before his death. And Pursuivant is co-starring in this story, along with Cobbett. And together they make a great team. Pursuivant with his years of knowledge of occult lore and fighting supernatural creatures, and Cobbett, who's younger but also has plenty of experience and is very forthright. Cobbett is a lot like Silver John in that he does not, or Thunston or Pursuivant, doesn't back away or stay away from danger. He goes right in there. Something's seeming off or bad or creepy or scary, and he doesn't run away. He confronts it. Pursuivant's older and wiser now, and so he, advises caution here and there. But the story of Chastel is very interesting. Chastel is the name of a famous actress from the stage, whose daughter appears to be the lead in a new musical version of Dracula that's being staged. Wellman, rather humorously in a very subtle way, is enjoying himself poking fun at musical adaptations of horror tales or more serious stories. The musical version of Dracula is called The Land Beyond the Forest, and the actor playing Dracula sings, and they have Gonda Chastel, supposedly the daughter of this famous actress from the past, is going to be playing the mistress of Dracula. And all of a sudden Pursuivant the story starts in New York, and Pursuivant is celebrating his birthday, and he's being interviewed by a young woman from some magazine or newspaper. Cobbett's there with his girlfriend Laurel, and the producer of this play, this new musical, who's besotted with his star, Chastel, and shows a photo of her, and she's indeed dark and stunning looking with very pale skin. And Pursuivant says, I knew the original Chastel, this woman's mother, and this daughter is a spitting image of her mother. And it turns out that Pursuivant was in love, had kind of a love affair with Chastel, but it didn't work out. And then something happened to the mother, and she seemed to disappear. Anyway, where this drama or musical version of Dracula is being staged is in this New England town near where there was some past vampire outbreak and cases, according to lore from earlier in the century. And so Pursuivant decides on a whim to join Lee Cobbett and Laurel, who've been invited to the backstage as they finish up rehearsals for this play and put it on. And so they all drive up there together, and things are definitely strange once they get to this village, this little town. And it's becomes clear that there is some vampiric influence going on here, and that Chastel, the young Gonda Chastel, is involved somehow. Lee Cobbett goes into the local grave at this area, local churchyard or graveyard, finds the crypt for the mother Chastel, and finds the crypt open and the coffin empty. And then he comes back out. He's confronted by Gonda Chastel, saying, promise me that, it's my mother. She's come back, risen from the dead, and you seem like a strong man who can help me try to, bring her peace. And Cobbett's playing it cool, and, she's a stunner, this Gonda Chastel, but, he's dedicated to his lady friend already, but he senses something hinky is up, and so does Judge Pursuivant. So Cobbett does promise not to go back into the graveyard, which means it's up to, in the end, Pursuivant to bring an end to the vampire reign that's starting to infest this town. Very cool story. It's not quite a novelette, but it's good 18 pages story, and it's very fun, especially fun to see two of Wellman's separate monster fighter creations sharing the stage together and working together to thwart evil. Later in Wellman's career, at the twilight of his career, he did this much more often. There's a Silver John novel, the third Silver John novel, The Hanging Stones, in which Silver John interacts and works alongside of Judge Pursuivant again, so that is very cool. And there's some other characters that overlap here and there in different novels and stories, and that's kind of a shared Wellman universe, is a lot of fun. Anyway, Wellman, I think, is just a really terrific writer, and his vibe of what he writes, the kind of type of tale he writes, is very unique. There's no one else quite like him doing what he's doing. Using that kind of, he doesn't always do this. A lot of the Thurston stories are taking place in, urban locations too, and using other kinds of African magic, which Wellman also has some background on, having been born, I believe, in the Congo. But where he really shines is in his stories set in the South, in the Appalachian mountain range area. And while this isn't set there, it's got plenty of cool flavor of its own. And certainly the Dakwa is set there and is just terrific. So I recommend both of these short stories. These are my entries for Horror Mayhem in the 1970s. I believe by now I've covered every decade, perhaps except for the 60s, at least between 1890 and 1990, in that 100-year period. I'll try to find some 60s set story, maybe something in the 2000s. I'm not going to guarantee it for the last week of Horror Mayhem. We have one more week of May coming up, and I still haven't gotten to a M.R. James story. Now, M.R. James wrote, back in the early 20th century, so it's going to be going back again, but I can't let this month pass without at least reading one M.R. James story. He's the master of the not so violent and gory, but definitely spooky ghost story, the traditional British ghost story. There is nobody better than M.R. James, in my opinion. So I'll be talking about some of those probably next week, maybe a few other things. In the meantime, I hope you're enjoying whatever else you're reading for Horror Mayhem, and I'll see you in the final week of Horror Mayhem next time. Thank you, and take care.